The violent crash of a whiskey bottle against the wall made Grace Johnson flinch, shards of glass raining down like deadly hail as her father's thunderous voice filled their small cabin on the outskirts of Cottonwood Creek, Wyoming Territory, 1876. At 20 years old, she had endured his drunken rages for as long as she could remember, but tonight something in his eyes told her this time might be different, this time might be worse. "You worthless little thief!" Vernon Johnson staggered across the wooden floor, his face contorted with rage. "I know you took my money. Where is it?" Grace backed away, her calloused hands raised defensively. "Papa, I didn't take anything. I swear it. You spent it all at Mackley's saloon yesterday." Her father's weathered face darkened as he lurched toward her, reeking of cheap whiskey and days without bathing. His once handsome features, now permanently etched with lines of bitterness, twisted into something barely human. "Liar," he spat, swinging wildly. His open palm connected with her cheek, the force of it sending her stumbling against the rough-hewn table. "You're just like your mother, nothing but a lying, thieving." Grace's vision blurred as pain exploded across her face. She could taste copper on her tongue where her teeth had cut the inside of her cheek. "Please," she whispered, "I didn't take anything." But reasoning with Vernon Johnson when he was in this state was like trying to reason with a rattlesnake. Impossible and dangerous. He grabbed her arm with bruising force, yanking her upright. "I worked my fingers to the bone for that money." Another blow landed, this time his fist catching her shoulder. "And you ungrateful." Grace ducked the next swing, desperation giving her speed. She made a dash for the door, her heart thundering in her chest, but her father was quicker than his drunken state suggested. He caught her by her long brown hair, yanking her back with enough force that she cried out in pain. "You're not going anywhere," he roared, throwing her against the wall. The impact knocked the wind from her lungs. Through the small window, she could see only darkness beyond, no neighbors for miles, no one to hear her screams. Not that anyone would interfere if they did. Folks in Cottonwood Creek had long ago decided that what happened between Vernon Johnson and his daughter was private business. Outside, the wind howled across the Wyoming plains, a lonely sound that matched the emptiness in Grace's heart. Her mother had died when she was just 8 years old, leaving her alone with the man who had once been a loving father but had since drowned himself in whiskey and bitterness. Vernon advanced on her again, his face a mask of fury. "I'll teach you to steal from me." He grabbed a broom from beside the hearth, brandishing it like a club. Grace covered her head with her arms, tears streaming down her face. "Papa, please," she sobbed. "I didn't." The first blow from the broom handle struck her forearm with enough force to make her cry out. The second would have hit her head if not for the sudden, thunderous pounding at the door. Both Grace and her father froze. "Who in tarnation?" Vernon swayed, momentarily distracted. The pounding came again, more insistent this time. "Johnson." A deep voice called from outside. "Open up." Vernon's bloodshot eyes narrowed. "Get rid of him," he hissed at Grace, grabbing her arm and shoving her toward the door. "Or I swear I'll make you regret it." Grace stumbled to the door, wiping blood from her split lip with trembling fingers. She opened it just a crack, trying to hide her battered appearance, but the light from the cabin spilled out, revealing her face to the visitor. Standing on their porch was a tall figure, his features obscured by the shadow cast by his wide-brimmed hat. All she could make out was the glint of his eyes and the outline of broad shoulders against the star-filled night sky. "Madam," the stranger said, his voice low and steady, "I heard screaming. Are you all right?" Before Grace could answer, her father pushed her roughly aside, positioning himself in the doorway. "We're just fine," Vernon growled. "Having a family discussion. "Now ride on, stranger. Nothing here concerns you." The visitor shifted slightly, and moonlight illuminated his face. Grace found herself looking at a man perhaps 5 years older than herself, handsome in a rugged way, with piercing blue eyes that took in everything, including the marks on her face and the way she cradled her arm. "Doesn't look like just a discussion to me," the stranger said, his hand casually resting near the holster at his hip. Vernon's posture stiffened. "I said ride on. What happens in my house is my business." "Pa, please," Grace whispered, terrified of what might happen if her father provoked this armed stranger. The man's gaze flickered to her, then back to Vernon. "I was hoping for directions to town," he said, his tone deceptively casual. "My horse is tired and I'm looking for a place to rest for the night." "Town's 5 miles west," Vernon snapped. "Follow the main trail, can't miss it." The stranger nodded slowly, his eyes never leaving Vernon's face. "Much obliged." He tipped his hat slightly in Grace's direction. "Madam." Something in his expression, a silent message, made Grace's heart skip a beat. Then he turned and walked back toward a magnificent black stallion waiting patiently in the darkness. Vernon slammed the door shut and rounded on Grace. "What did I tell you about making a spectacle?" He raised his hand again, but this time Grace didn't cower. "He's still out there," she whispered. "He'll hear." Her father hesitated, then lowered his hand with a snarl. "Get to your room. I don't want to look at your face any more tonight." He stumbled toward the table where another bottle of whiskey waited. Ungrateful little. Grace retreated to her small room, closing the thin door behind her. She sank onto her narrow bed, wincing at the pain in her ribs and arm. Through the tiny window, she could see the stranger hadn't left after all. He stood beside his horse just beyond the circle of light spilling from the cabin, watching. For the first time in years, something other than fear and resignation stirred in Grace's heart. Something that felt dangerously like hope. Outside, Nathan Marshall waited, his hand resting on his horse's neck. The animal, sensing his tension, shifted restlessly. "Easy, Thunder," Nathan murmured, his eyes never leaving the cabin. He'd been riding since dawn, making his way from Denver to his new post as deputy in Cottonwood Creek, when he'd heard the screams. His instincts had told him to investigate, and what he'd found made his blood boil. The woman, little more than a girl, really had clearly been beaten. And from what he could see through the open door, it wasn't the first time. The old drunk had "abuser" written all over his whiskey-soaked face. Nathan hadn't survived 3 years as a lawman by being impulsive, but something about the quiet desperation in the young woman's eyes struck him to the core. He'd seen that look before in his own mother's eyes, years ago, before his father had finally drunk himself to death. He knew he should ride on. He had no jurisdiction here, not yet. This was family business, as the drunk had said. But the thought of leaving that girl to suffer more abuse made his jaw clench. "What do you think, Thunder?" he whispered to his horse. "Should we just happen to camp nearby tonight?" The horse nickered softly, as if in agreement. Nathan led Thunder a short distance away, just out of sight of the cabin but still within earshot. He unsaddled the stallion, set up a small camp, and settled in to wait, his senses alert to any sound from the cabin. He didn't have to wait long. Just past midnight, the shouting started again, followed by the unmistakable sound of breaking furniture and a woman's cry of pain. Nathan was on his feet in an instant, checking his revolver before striding toward the cabin. Thunder whinnied nervously, but stayed where he was tied. As Nathan approached, the cabin door suddenly burst open. The young woman stumbled out, clutching a small bundle to her chest, her face a mask of terror. Behind her, the drunk appeared in the doorway, wielding an axe handle. "Get back here," the man bellowed, his words slurred. "I'm not finished with you." The woman saw Nathan and froze like a startled deer. For a moment, their eyes locked hers wide with fear and desperate hope, his steady with resolve. "Run to my horse," Nathan said quietly, stepping between her and the enraged drunk. The black stallion just over that rise. She hesitated for only a moment before darting around him, clutching her bundle tighter as she fled into the darkness. The drunk on the porch swayed dangerously, his bloodshot eyes focusing with difficulty on Nathan. "You," he growled. "I told you to ride on. This ain't your business." "I'm making it my business," Nathan replied, his voice level despite the anger coursing through him. "Go back inside, sleep it off. We'll all be better for it in the morning." The man's face twisted with rage. "That's my daughter." "You got no right. A father who beats his daughter forfeits any right to her," Nathan cut in, his hand resting casually near his holster. "Now, I'm not looking for trouble, but I won't let you hurt her again tonight." For a moment, it seemed as if the drunk might back down. Then, with surprising speed for a man in his condition, he charged forward, swinging the axe handle wildly. Nathan sidestepped the clumsy attack, drawing his revolver in one smooth motion. He didn't fire, no need for killing, but brought the butt of the weapon down hard on the back of the drunk's head as he stumbled past. The man collapsed face first into the dirt, unconscious but breathing. Nathan quickly retrieved some rope from his saddlebags and bound the man's hands and feet. It wouldn't hold him forever, but it would give them time to get away. He found the young woman huddled beside Thunder, who was eyeing her with gentle curiosity. She flinched when Nathan approached, and the moonlight revealed fresh bruises forming on her face alongside the older ones. "He won't hurt you now," Nathan said softly, keeping a respectful distance. "I'm Nathan Marshall. I'm riding to Cottonwood Creek to take up a post as deputy there." Her eyes widened. You're a lawman," Nathan nodded. "Yes, madam, and you are Grace," she whispered. "Grace Johnson." She clutched her bundle tighter, and Nathan realized it contained a few meager possessions, perhaps all she owned in the world. "Miss Johnson, your father will sleep for a while, but when he wakes—" Nathan let the implications hang in the air. Grace shuddered. "He'll kill me for sure this time." "Not if you're not here," Nathan said. "I can take you to Cottonwood Creek. You'd be safe there, at least until we figure something more permanent." Hope and fear warred in her expression. I don't know anyone there." "You know me," Nathan said simply. "And I give you my word as a lawman and a gentleman that no harm will come to you." Grace looked back at the cabin, her prison for so many years, then to the vast, starlit sky above. Freedom lay before her if only she had the courage to take it. "All right," she said finally. "I'll go with you." Nathan helped her mount Thunder, then climbed up behind her, careful to maintain a respectful distance despite the necessary proximity. As they rode away from the cabin, he felt her shoulders begin to shake with silent sobs, whether from relief, fear, or some combination of both. He couldn't tell. All he knew was that something fundamental had changed in him the moment he saw her face in that doorway. And as Thunder carried them through the darkness toward Cottonwood Creek, Nathan Marshall made a silent vow that Grace Johnson would never suffer at her father's hands again. Dawn was breaking over the eastern plains when they reached Cottonwood Creek. The small frontier town was just beginning to stir, a few early risers opening shops, the blacksmith already at work at his forge, sending sparks flying into the morning air. Grace had fallen into an exhausted sleep against Nathan's chest during the last mile of their journey. He hated to wake her, knowing it might be the first peaceful rest she'd had in ages, but they needed to find her a safe place before the town fully awoke. "Miss Johnson," he said softly. "Grace." "We're here." She stirred, then tensed as she came fully awake, momentarily disoriented. Then reality seemed to return and she straightened, wincing at the pain from her injuries. "Sorry," she murmured, embarrassed at having fallen asleep against him. "I didn't mean to. No need for apologies," Nathan assured her. "You've been through more than anyone should have to endure." He guided Thunder down the main street, acutely aware of the curious glances from the few people already about. A young woman arriving with a strange man at dawn, bearing visible bruises it would set tongues wagging within the hour. Nathan had telegraphed ahead about his appointment, so he knew his first stop should be the sheriff's office. Sheriff Benson would be expecting him, though perhaps not with a battered woman in tow. As they reached the small wooden building marked Sheriff, Nathan dismounted and helped Grace down. She swayed slightly, exhaustion and pain evident in every movement. "Wait here a moment," he said gently, tying Thunder to the hitching post. "Let me explain things to the sheriff first." Grace nodded, her eyes anxious as she surveyed the unfamiliar town. Nathan entered the office to find a grizzled man of about 50 sorting through wanted posters at a desk. The man looked up, his shrewd eyes taking in Nathan's trail-worn appearance. "You must be Marshall," he said, rising to offer his hand. "Jebediah Benson. Got your wire last week." "Sir," Nathan acknowledged, shaking the offered hand. "Thank you for the opportunity." "Well, Denver said you're one of their best. We need good men out here." Benson's gaze drifted to the window. "Who's the girl?" Nathan explained the situation as concisely as possible, watching the sheriff's expression grow increasingly grim. "Vernon Johnson," Benson muttered when Nathan finished. "Know him, mean drunk. Comes into town every few weeks to cause trouble." He sighed heavily. "His poor wife died years back, influenza, I heard. Girl's been alone with him ever since." "She needs a safe place to stay," Nathan said, "and medical attention." Benson nodded thoughtfully. "Mrs. Abernathy runs the boarding house across from the general store. She's a widow, decent sort. Might take the girl in." He grabbed his hat from a hook. "Let's go talk to her, and we'll fetch Doc Wilson on the way." They stepped outside where Grace was still standing beside Thunder, looking small and vulnerable in the growing light. "Miss Johnson," Sheriff Benson said, his gruff voice softening. "I'm Sheriff Benson. Deputy Marshal here tells me you've had a rough time." Grace nodded, her eyes downcast. "Yes, sir." "Well, you're safe now," Benson assured her. "No one's going to hurt you in my town." The doctor, a kindly man in his 60s, confirmed what Nathan had suspected. Grace had multiple bruises, 2 cracked ribs, and years of poorly healed injuries beneath her current wounds. What he hadn't expected was the doctor's grim pronouncement that Vernon Johnson should be arrested for attempted murder. "These injuries," Doc Wilson said quietly to Nathan and the sheriff, out of Grace's earshot. "The pattern suggests he was choking her before you interrupted. A few minutes more." He left the sentence unfinished, but his meaning was clear. Mrs. Abernathy, a plump, motherly woman with iron-gray hair, took one look at Grace and immediately offered her best room, waving away any discussion of payment until the poor child is back on her feet. By mid-morning, Grace was settled in a clean, sunlit room at the boarding house, her meager possessions unpacked, her injuries treated and bandaged. Nathan, having seen her safely established, knew he needed to report for his first official day as deputy, but found himself reluctant to leave her side. "I'll check on you this evening," he promised, standing awkwardly in the doorway of her room. Grace looked up at him from where she sat on the edge of the bed, her brown hair freshly washed and braided by Mrs. Abernathy's capable hands. Despite her bruises, there was a new light in her eyes, the tentative beginnings of hope. "Thank you," she said softly. "I don't know how I'll ever repay you for what you did." "No repayment necessary," Nathan replied. "Just focus on healing." He hesitated, then added, "Your father, the sheriff, and I will be riding out to arrest him this afternoon. Is there anything at the cabin you need retrieved?" Grace thought for a moment, then shook her head. "Nothing I can't live without." A shadow crossed her face. "He'll fight you. When he's drinking, he doesn't know when to stop." "We'll handle it," Nathan assured her. "You don't need to worry about him anymore." But Vernon Johnson wasn't at the cabin when they arrived. The place had been ransacked, provisions taken, and his horse was gone from the small corral. A neighbor reported seeing him ride east at first light, already drinking heavily from a fresh bottle. "He's running," Benson observed grimly. "Probably heading for the territorial line. He knows what's waiting for him if we catch him." Nathan felt both relief that Grace wouldn't have to face her father in a courtroom and frustration that the man might escape justice. "We should organize a posse." Benson shook his head. "Not worth the manpower. He's a mean drunk, but he's also a coward. He won't come back here knowing we're looking for him." He spat into the dust. "Good riddance, I say." Over the following weeks, Grace began to heal not just physically but in spirit. Mrs. Abernathy took her under her wing, teaching her to help run the boarding house. The townsfolk, learning of her situation, rallied around her with a generosity that brought tears to Grace's eyes. The general store owner offered her a job helping with inventory. The school teacher provided books to improve her limited education. Even the ladies of the church society, normally quick to judge, made her a quilt for her bed and invited her to their weekly gatherings. And through it all, Nathan Marshall was a steady, reassuring presence. He visited her daily, first just to check on her recovery, then increasingly because he simply wanted to see her. They would talk on the boarding house porch in the evenings, watching the sunset paint the western sky in brilliant colors. He told her about growing up in Ohio, about his mother's struggle with his own abusive father, and how that had driven him to become a lawman. Grace, in turn, slowly shared fragments of her own life, the brief, happy memories of her mother, the garden she had tended behind the cabin, her secret dream of someday becoming a teacher herself. By midsummer, the bruises had faded completely from Grace's face, revealing a natural beauty that turned heads when she walked through town. Several young men began finding excuses to visit the general store during her working hours or to attend church services more regularly. Nathan watched this development with a growing sense of unease that he was reluctant to examine too closely. Grace deserved happiness, deserved the chance to choose her own path without any obligations to the man who had rescued her. Yet each time he saw Caleb Anderson, the banker's son, offering to carry Grace's packages, or Thomas Winslow, the young rancher, bringing her wildflowers, Nathan felt a tightness in his chest that no amount of reasoning could dispel. One evening in late July, Nathan was making his usual rounds when he passed the schoolhouse and noticed a light still burning inside. Curious, he peered through the window to see Grace sitting alone at one of the small desks, bent over a book, her face a study in concentration. He knocked softly on the door and she looked up, startled, then smiled when she saw him. "Deputy Marshal," she greeted him, using his title as she always did in public, though in their private conversations she had begun calling him Nathan. "It's a bit late to be studying, isn't it?" he asked, stepping inside and removing his hat. Grace marked her place in the book and advanced arithmetic text, he noted. "Miss Winters said I could use the schoolhouse in the evenings. I'm trying to catch up on my education." A hint of color touched her cheeks. "I never got past basic reading and figures before my mother died." Nathan leaned against a desk, studying her. In the golden lamplight, with her hair falling in soft waves around her face and her eyes bright with determination, she took his breath away. "You're planning to become a teacher?" he asked. She nodded, a small, private smile playing at her lips. "Miss Winters says I have a natural aptitude. If I study hard, I might be ready to apply to the teacher's college in Denver by next spring. Denver. The word hit Nathan like a physical blow. Of course, she would want to leave Cottonwood Creek eventually to build a new life far from the shadows of her past. It was what she deserved. Yet the thought of her leaving made his chest ache in a way he couldn't ignore any longer. "That's wonderful," he managed, his voice sounding strange even to his own ears. Grace looked at him curiously, her head tilted slightly. "Nathan, is something wrong?" He cleared his throat, suddenly aware that they were alone in the dimly lit schoolhouse, that propriety demanded he not linger, even as every instinct urged him to stay. "No, nothing's wrong," he said. He broke off, uncertain how to continue. Grace set her book aside and stood, approaching him with a gentle concern in her eyes that made his heart race. "You've been acting strangely these past few weeks. Every time Mr. Winslow or Caleb speaks to me, you look as if you've bitten into something sour." Nathan felt heat rise in his face. Had he been that obvious? "I'm just concerned for your welfare," he said lamely. "After everything you've been through, you deserve someone who will treat you right." Grace stopped directly in front of him, close enough that he could smell the faint lavender scent of her soap. "And what if I already know who that someone is?" she asked softly, her eyes never leaving his. The air between them seemed to crackle with unspoken words. Nathan swallowed hard, acutely aware of crossing a line that, once crossed, could never be redrawn. "Grace," he began, his voice rough with emotion. "I never meant to. I don't want you to feel obligated because of what happened." "Obligated," she interrupted, a spark of indignation in her eyes. "Nathan Marshall, you think so little of me that you believe I would give my heart out of obligation." "Your heart," he echoed, scarcely daring to hope he understood her correctly. "Yes, you impossible man," Grace said, her voice growing stronger. "My heart, which you've had in your keeping since the night you rode out of the darkness and stood between me and harm." Nathan reached out slowly, giving her every chance to withdraw, and touched her cheek with gentle fingers. "I've never met anyone as brave as you," he said quietly. "You survived years of what would have broken most people, and still you have such kindness, such hope." Grace leaned into his touch, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "It was your kindness that saved me, not just from my father, but from believing that was all I deserved." Nathan knew he should leave, should escort her back to the boarding house before rumors could start. But the thought of walking away from this moment, from the truth finally spoken between them, was unbearable. "I love you, Grace Johnson," he said simply. "I think I've loved you since I first saw you standing in that doorway, trying so hard to be brave." A single tear slipped down Grace's cheek. "And I love you, Nathan Marshall, not because you saved me, but because of the man you are every day since." When he finally kissed her, it was with a gentleness that spoke volumes, a promise that her heart, her trust, her love would always be safe with him. They were married in the small white church of Cottonwood Creek that October, with the cottonwood trees along the creek blazing gold against the blue Wyoming sky. Mrs. Abernathy wept openly throughout the ceremony, proclaiming it the most romantic thing she'd ever witnessed. Sheriff Benson, standing as Nathan's best man, merely smiled knowingly, having watched their love grow throughout the summer. Grace wore a simple white dress made by the ladies of the church society, who had embraced her completely by then. In her hands, she carried wildflowers gathered that morning, a reminder, she told Nathan privately, that beauty could grow even in the harshest conditions. They made their home in a small but sturdy house on the edge of town, close enough for Nathan to reach the sheriff's office quickly if needed, but with enough land for Grace to plant the garden she had always dreamed of. She continued her studies with Miss Winters, her progress so remarkable that by spring, the school board offered her a position as assistant teacher for the coming term. As for Vernon Johnson, rumors occasionally drifted back to Cottonwood Creek. He had been seen in Cheyenne, in a mining camp near the Montana border, in a saloon in South Dakota. Each time, Nathan would tense, ready to protect Grace if necessary, but her father never returned to Wyoming Territory. "He has no power over me anymore," Grace told Nathan one evening as they sat on their porch, watching fireflies dance in the gathering dusk. "He can't hurt us." Nathan covered her hand with his, marveling at how far she had come from the terrified young woman he had first met. "No, he can't," he agreed. "Nothing can." 3 years after their wedding, as summer once again painted the plains with wildflowers, Grace gave birth to their first child, a daughter with her mother's gentle spirit and her father's determined blue eyes. They named her Emma, after Grace's mother, a way of reclaiming the few happy memories from Grace's past and weaving them into the joy of their present. As Nathan held his newborn daughter, with Grace smiling tiredly but radiantly beside him, he thought about the night he had heard screams on the wind and chosen to investigate rather than ride on. One decision, made in an instant, had changed everything. "What are you thinking about?" Grace asked, reaching up to touch his cheek. Nathan smiled, leaning down to kiss her forehead. "I'm thinking that sometimes the longest journeys begin with a single act of courage." "Yours or mine?" she asked with a knowing smile. "Both," he replied, gazing at his wife and daughter with a heart so full it seemed impossible to contain. "Always both." Outside their window, the Wyoming wind whispered through the cottonwoods. No longer a lonely sound, but a lullaby for the family that had found each other against all odds, a deputy who had followed his conscience into the darkness, and a young woman who had found the courage to ride away from all she had ever known toward the promise of something better. And as the summer stars appeared one by one in the vast western sky, their light seemed to bless the small house where love had finally conquered fear, and where a family born of courage and compassion would thrive for many years to come.